Hi, I'm Oliver Gwynn, a data strategist here at 173 Tech, and today I'm presenting three interesting findings from our data salary review. That being that the salary for data analysts has nearly doubled in the last 5 years, that there's more head of data roles in the UK versus the US, and that data engineers have had the most volatile time in terms of salary expectations. Now, you might be wondering, where did this data come from? Well, we scraped data from Indeed, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Salary Expert, Reed, Bulletins, Talent, Statista, the Salary Checker, Total Jobs, and NerdWallet to find average salaries across the last 5 years. And it's important to note that this is averages of averages. And we would generally expect that to be a little bit higher than reality. And that's especially true of smaller tech hubs where a few large employers can really inflate the numbers. So let's dive into it now. So we're on the 173 Tech website. And I will say that this is something that works well on a desktop. It doesn't particularly work on mobile. I'll just start from the beginning so you can see the full interface. So if you're interested, maybe I will do a video where I discuss how we put all of this together and the lessons I learned, because I think it's really interesting what we've built here. The first thing I wanted to talk about was data analyst salary. So I'm going to go for data for my role, data analyst. I'm going to start in London. So here we have average salaries presented in USD, and that's so that we could have fair comparison across all the 23 locations that we've got in the study. I will say one of the tricky things about this project was translating the salaries from pounds in this case to dollars, because it's been fluctuating so often. And so this is not sort of live data based on today's market rate or anything. I had to just take an average from the last couple of years and then apply it to this. And we've got two comparison points. So one is 2020, so pre-COVID, and the second is 2023, so just after COVID. And there's a lot of volatility in that time period where there was a rush for talent after COVID, and so a lot of salaries were inflated after that point. And so we can see here, this is again London data analysts by experience. In most cases, post COVID, the salaries have risen nearly doubled, 90%, 90%, 89.4%, not quite 90%, across all experience bands. Let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So these are the average salaries each year for each of these particular roles, depending on experience. And you might imagine that if you started as a junior in 2023, you get to here, you would then go up here and then do a couple more years of experience, and then you might be up here. One of the things to note is you might be thinking, Oliver, do you think that's true? Do you think that salaries have nearly doubled? It doesn't seem in line with reality. I would say that they probably have. One is that London is especially a competitive market. It's one of the best markets in the world for data roles in general. The second would be that the inflation in the UK has risen massively. And so that has meant that people need to be paid more because otherwise they can't afford to live. And so, yeah, we've seen salaries go up. And the third is that people are a lot more demanding in terms of what they're going to expect for the money that they're paying. Last year, I went to an awful lot of meetups and networking events, and I met loads of young people who were just starting their careers in data, and nearly all of them have got jobs now. But what they were telling me was that it's a very competitive market, and you were expected to know even more. You're expected to know SQL and Python and Looker and Power BI and all of these different systems, and even how data engineering works in some cases. And so the barrier to entry is probably higher than it's been in the past. It's certainly not a case that you can just be sort of somebody who doesn't know and you're going to get trained up. Employees have higher expectations than they did in the past because they're paying more money. Now, despite this, wage growth, which is how we're looking at it, things, the highest salaries in the world are not going to be in the UK. They're still going to be in America. And I can compare that here. So Boston, Chicago, California, Atlanta, New York, Richmond, a lot of American companies. And also, just to mention, if you were interested in this and you're like, this is neat, but I want to kind of compare and contrast all of these different roles, you can just click on the download button. It's then going to take you to a PDF and you can download that. You do have to put in your email here, but don't worry, I'm not going to spam you with anything. And that gives you an overall ranking across 23 hubs, about three roles, which is head of data, data analyst, data engineer. And so, yeah, it's a really useful document to begin with a grain of salt because, as I said, it is averages on averages, but it can be really useful to know where are you faring in the market. So I'm going to go back and try and answer our second question, which is why are there more data roles advertised for heads of data in the UK versus the US? And this time I'm going to be looking at California to begin with. Now, you might notice on here we've got a lot of cities, and then we've got California, which is, of course, a state. Because of the way that we've scraped the data, things like London, the city of London is quite small, Greater London, they're used interchangeably. And the same is true of New York. A lot of people don't really mean New York, the city, versus New York, the state. And with California, 90% of the jobs are in LA, but by using California as a whole, it just averaged out things. Of course, California is the biggest tech hub in the world. And this time we're going to go down to average amount of jobs posted. And it's probably a lot less than you're expecting considering California, big tech hub. This data came from LinkedIn specifically, so people have been posting on there. And there's not that many. You might be surprised to think, oh, there's only 20 on average a month for heads of data in California. You might expect more. But let's compare that. London, there's nearly three times as much as number two, which is New York. Now, it could be a case that more people use LinkedIn to advertise the jobs in the UK versus in America. That's completely possible. I think it's actually something different. What I think that this data shows is that in the UK, we still have a maturing data market. I would say 50% of the companies I speak to don't have any data set up. The people who do obviously often have something that's not really mature, that somebody was sort of tasked to building and they've not built something that's very robust. And so I think that there are more heads of data being advertised in the UK, but they are still one person teams, they are still small organizations, they're not necessarily more mature. And so when we see the amount of jobs posted and we see it's less for America, it's actually because they're more mature. So when you're ahead of data there, it's normally because it's a larger organization. It's more reflective of the actual role you'll be doing versus the UK, in my opinion. And last but not least, let's have a look at data engineers. Let's go for Germany this time. And again, I wanted to show the volatility. And here's a great example. I did not even have to guess. I didn't prepare this in advance, but I knew that most of them are quite volatile for data engineers. So again, look at this spike in 2022. This is just as COVID is ending. And what we see in a lot of places is there's a rush for talent. Most people can't afford the really experienced talent. And so they try and get juniors in and build them up. And yeah, there's a massive rise in a lot of people. 22 was like a magic year for data people. And I know a lot of people who they didn't really have the experience that year. Maybe they were still building that. Maybe they had a little bit of analytics background, but they were able to get into data. They were able to massively improve their salaries. And if they stuck the landing, which not everybody did, they were suddenly in a decent job. And I'm speaking to those people now, and it's really interesting because where are they going to go? They're probably not going to see a rise in their salary to that degree for another couple of years. They really need to build up their experience. Often they're not necessarily doing things that are not junior data salaries. They're still doing those kind of roles. They're not really progressed in terms of what they can offer a company, and so they're on a very high salary for the experience they have. In a lot of cases, this really disrupted the people who were already in house. If you had a larger team, and those people left for a bigger salary, but really, really interesting. Let's just pick another place out of interest. Now, France has pretty stable job market, probably one of the more stable ones. But again, we see a big rise in 2022. for data engineers. And that's because I think when you are building something new, there will always be a rise in data engineers. It kind of tells you the maturity of the market. Where data engineers are not being hired, or it typically means that people are not really building things. And you would expect that it's going to go up again because of AI. But I think a lot of people are not necessarily mature in their AI. They only think they are. It's kind of a false reading. So I do expect that data engineers will be more in demand in the future. But as more and more people implement those pipelines, then the demand will go down. And so the average salaries will also go down with it. This is a completely free tool. You can go onto the website and check it out. It's built with HTML5, which I think is really interesting. And if there is demand, I will do another video where I go into how did we build this? Where did we get the data? What were the challenges that we faced? Because I think that's a really interesting use case and how can you put together a data product. Another point that I would just wanted to put on here is about um, cost of living. So the cost of living, it's less robust than some of the other data here, but we have that on average for the different cities, and then we've gone at what was the rise or fall depending on the year. And again, we see a huge impact of COVID in there in terms of going up and then leveling off. In the places that it was already expensive, they could not put the price up too much. But in England, for example, the cost of living's massively gone up versus some of America, where it's actually come down, and in places like Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and France, it's been pretty steady. And so I hope this is a really useful resource when you're thinking about your career, if you're thinking about moving for your career, because it gives you um, an overview of not only the average salaries by experience, but also the cost of living, the amount of jobs, and then what services are people looking for, the amount of jobs posted in different ones. And I can tell you throughout this, financial services is the biggest one by a large chunk. In nearly every place of the 23 places that I looked at, financial services has more job postings than ever. So if you are looking for stability in your career, financial services would be the place to go. If you build up your experience, you can probably rise slower because there's more people in there, but you'll have a more stable career. It pays relatively well compared to other places. But you might also be looking for some place where you want a nice distribution. You don't want an area where if financial services suddenly struggles, then you're going to be stuck basically, and you might really struggle to get a new job, like Edinburgh, for example. Hope this was useful and interesting. Check out the data salary review on the 173 Tech. It's all available 100% for free. And if you want to download anything, you just put in your email. I don't even add you to a mailing list. So check it out today. And I hope this was useful and interesting.